Hi everyone, I'm here in Frankfort, Kentucky to interview Governor Steve Beshear for the 2016 Graham sessions. It is a real pleasure to meet you, Governor, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Steve.
And as far as thank yous go, I would also like to thank you for appointing a physical therapist to your Exchange Advisory Board. So Connie Hauser enjoyed serving in that capacity for your state, and I suspect your staff found out what the superstar we already know she is.
Yes, we did. She was a big help to us.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, following the signing of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, many states and governors took a kind of wait-and-see approach. And why did you in Kentucky select to be the leader and take the parameters of the law and begin to put plans into place for the Commonwealth of Kentucky?
Well, Steve, it was really very simple. Kentucky is one of the least healthy states in the country.
Okay.
We're like most of the South. We eat too much. We don't have a great lifestyle in exercise or anything else, and we're just unhealthy. And those statistics didn't just occur last week or last year. I mean, we've been in the same place ever since they started keeping the statistics. So while we've always chipped away at our health and trying to make it better, I knew that to make a transformational change in our health status, we needed a transformational tool to do that. And then along came the Affordable Care Act. Now, you know, it's not perfect. I'm sure we could have done it 10 different ways, but I had never been handed a tool like that in my lifetime, and no other Kentucky governor had either. And when it came along, I wasn't going to miss that opportunity because I felt like that this was the moment in time where we could make a tremendous change for the better in the long-term health and care of our citizens. And so I jumped at it and we took off running, and we haven't stopped yet.
Yeah, great. Well, it's been very impressive. You know, Kentucky has been seen as the leader with this health care reform, and what do you believe are the areas in which Kentucky is leading and can be the benchmark for other states that are trying to do the same thing?
Well, you know, when we made that decision, we did a whole lot of planning. I decided and became, I think, the only southern state to both expand Medicaid and to create our own state-based exchange. Creating our own exchange was not a difficult decision because all of our stakeholders really wanted, they said, you know, if we're going to have an exchange, which everybody was, then let's do it ourselves because we can design it better for our own needs rather than to take kind of a cookie cutter approach that the federal exchange would of necessity be. The other decision of expanding Medicaid was a more difficult one, not because I didn't think we needed it. I mean, I knew it was the right thing to do. But as governor, I also had a responsibility of figuring out, can we afford it?
Yeah.
And you know, that's been the big question all along.
Yeah.
And so before I made that decision, I asked PricewaterhouseCoopers, an internationally renowned actuarial firm, to come in and do a study. I said, look at this and tell me what I'm going to either do to Kentucky or for Kentucky if I expand the Medicaid program. They took about 6 months, and they came in, sat down, looked me in the eye and said, Governor, you can't afford not to do this.
Okay, interesting.
Because it's going to create over 8 years about 17,000 new jobs, and it's going to infuse about $15 billion of new money into your economy. So on that basis, we decided to do both, and we've hit the ground running.
And up until now, there's been a lot of federal funding for that, but it's going to have to pay for itself here soon. So are you on track to get that as well?
We're on track to do that. You know, the state-based exchange called Connect is not costing the taxpayers any money because the providers, the insurance companies that are involved, are paying the freight to keep the exchange going. So no money coming out of the taxpayer's pocket there. Then on Medicaid, as you know, under the Affordable Care Act, up until 2017, the federal government pays the entire cost of expanded Medicaid. And then it starts kicking in, a match starts kicking in, starting at 2%, and I think in the year 2021 ends up being 10%, and then it'll be a 90-10 match, which is a better match than the current Medicaid program. The economic study we did indicated that we were going to create more than enough new revenue out of new jobs and out of growth in our economy to be able to pay that match and still have some left over.
Okay. And has the program affected premiums that Kentuckians are paying that are in the more traditional insurance programs as well, or has that stayed fairly flat in your state?
Well, first, let's remember what was happening to premiums before the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, you mean like this?
Yeah, skyrocketing
Yeah.
every single year. People were complaining all over the place. Now people kind of that want to criticize the Affordable Care Act conveniently forget that.
Yeah.
But insurance premiums were going through the roof anyway. Actually, that curve has started to bend some because you've got so many more people in the program and so many more people paying. And the subsidies, of course, from the federal government are helping. And so that cost curve is starting to bend now. Sure, in some of the plans in Connect, premiums are going up some. Actually, in one or two, they drop some. So, the marketplace is kind of shaking out right now. We started out, I think, with 3 companies in Kentucky. We haven't had much competition here for a long time in the health insurance business. We now have 8. And that speaks for itself. I mean, that competition is becoming more robust all the time. And guess what happens when you get competition?
Yeah.
The prices go down. So I think we're going to see those premiums settling out.
Yeah, and that's kind of the next question is, we've seen the big 5 nationally insurance companies go down to 3, and that competition seems to be going away. Is that good for the future of healthcare? Do you think that we need more competition, as you just described?
Well, and I think we'll have it. Obviously, the real big companies are looking at each other, and some are merging, but you're still going to have plenty of competition out there in the marketplace. And I think a lot of room for smaller businesses like physical therapy businesses and rehabilitative services and devices, because in Kentucky, for instance, small business is the backbone of our economy. 95% of our companies in Kentucky employ 50 or fewer people.
Yeah.
So small business is what it's all about in Kentucky, and of course with physical therapy, that's what most of your folks are involved
That's
with.
correct. And the state exchanges from many states like yours have decreased the number of uninsured significantly. What healthcare providers are experiencing is an increase in the number of these people that they're seeing through the exchanges, which is great. But we're also seeing some lower rates than we're used to as well. So my question would be, is there a way that we can increase the cost at some point so the small businesses can stay in business to see the increased volume that they're seeing?
I think down the road you'll see some price increases for the services that physical therapists provide and other folks provide. What's happening out here, it's been an amazing story. And Kentucky is a wonderful example of this. I mean, we've had this in for, what, a year and a half. Uncompensated care in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, in our hospitals, for instance, has gone from something like 25%, where we're paying for it anyway. Taxpayers pay for that, because hospitals have to provide that care.
Right, at a much higher level.
Yeah, it's gone from 25% to about 5%. I mean, uncompensated care with our providers has dropped like 70% over a year and a half. The uninsured in Kentucky has gone from over 20% when we started a year and a half later, 9%, and it continues to drop. So as you get this marketplace going and it shakes out and things start humming, I think you're going to have room then, because revenues will be flowing, rates will be more steady. I think there will be a lot more room for different increases in the services that folks like your people provide.
Those benchmarks are impressive. Do you feel this is a legacy of yours leaving office?
Well, certainly I'm excited about it. Legacies are something that other people decide on. But I'll say this, for the first time in our history in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, every single Kentuckian now has access to affordable health care. And that's something. And if you project that out over a generation, not only are those families going to be so much better off, so much healthier, but our economy is going to be so much better off, because we're going to have a more productive workforce, because it's going to be a healthier workforce. When we first started this, we had a lot of naysayers, obviously, and a lot of it was just tied to the fact of the name of the president on the bill. But I said from the beginning, forget about this politics, because this is not about politics. This is about us.
Well,
This is about our families.
Speaking of that, how does a Democratic governor in a fairly red state make that happen? I mean, you did it, and everyone else looks at you to, this is how to do it. How do you do that in that environment?
Well, because we divorced it from politics. And I know that's difficult to do these days. I mean, in Washington, nothing is divorced from politics, and nobody can talk to each other. Fortunately, here in the Commonwealth, I like to kind of say that we may be the last place where democracy still works because I've got a Republican Senate, a Democratic House, I'm a Democratic governor, but you know, after elections are over with, we tend to be able to remember that we're Kentuckians first and Democrats and Republicans second.
Yeah.
And every time you can get people to do that, you can make some progress.
Yeah.
We've made a lot of progress here because of that. And fortunately, be honest with you, I was able to do this on my own. I didn't have to go to the legislature and get anything passed. I could make the decision and make it happen. And by golly, that's what we did.
Sounds a little Henry Clash there. So
he's one of our best.
That's great. You know, during that time, you know, you talked about the resistance that was there. I even heard or read about that the state police had to escort a few members to some of the meetings. Is that true? And in the beginning stages, it was that tense?
Well, there was some tension, but I think that got overblown a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, folks, when they figured out what was going on and then they saw the results, I mean, for instance, preventive services. The use of preventive services in the Commonwealth of Kentucky in the last year and a half has skyrocketed, like 150% increases in things like cervical cancer screenings, breast cancer screenings, diabetes testing, all of the different preventive measures that are going to save us money in the long run.
Down the road.
Yeah, it's going to keep people from ending up in the emergency room and in those inpatient days. They're going to learn how to take care of themselves. And because of that, they'll be better off, and our economy will be better off, and the taxpayers will be better off.
Yeah. Now that you've gone through it a little bit, if you were to recommend one thing that could make the Affordable Care Act better, what would you tell the next president?
Well, if we could ever get people in Washington to be able to sit down and talk to each other,
It'd be nice.
and it would be nice. I'm not sure it'll ever happen, but hopefully it will. There are certain things that you need to change about this. I think you should sit down and look at more of the small business area and see if there are some tweaks that we can do that will help small business and make it more affordable for some small businesses. I think that's one of the main areas that we need to take a harder look at and maybe make some changes because, as I say, they're the backbone of our economy here in Kentucky and really in the United States. So for this to work long term, we got to make sure that it's affordable for everybody.
Well, you're leaving office, I understand, soon, and you were able to do it in this state. Looking at the bigger stage at all? There's room in there, I hear, from that.
Well, there's a lot of room for leadership in this country, that's for sure. But you know, I'm not looking to do anything else. I feel good about what we've done for 8 years, and my wife tells me that she needs me home mucking the stalls out on the farm. So we'll see what happens.
That's great. So what are your thoughts on health and wellness for Kentuckians in the future? So what progress has been made? You've described some already, but what do you see 5-10 years down the road that you can look back on and say, man, this is why we did it all?
Well, we've started from about the lowest point you can start. So improvement is relative, as you know, but I see Kentucky in about 10 years really having moved up the ranks in health statistics. And that will be something monumental for us because we have suffered from poor health for years and from lack of education in health matters and taking care of ourselves. And the Affordable Care Act is providing us this opportunity to educate our people about health issues and about how to take care of yourself, to keep yourself out of trouble and to keep healthy. And it's also going to help our kids. You know, having these kids being able to go to the doctor regularly, have dental visits regularly, it's going to make a tremendous difference in the long term for our families. I mean, in the next generation or so, you'll see Kentucky, I think, toward the top of the list instead of the bottom.
No, that would be impressive, yes. Tell me a little bit about what you drew you back into public office, because I know that you were in the private sector for a while and then came back in. So what was the, why jump back in?
Well, years ago, I got into public service and served in our House of Representatives, and then I was our Attorney General and then Lieutenant Governor. And then I ran for governor in 1987, back in the last century, and lost. Well, my political career was over. You know, you don't really get two shots at that usually. And so I got back in the private sector, was reasonably successful, not only in the law practice, but in banking. And then 20 years later, the opportunity sort of came around, and I stepped up and got in a 7-way primary and won. And I must say, you know, it took me 20 years to learn how to win a governor's race, but I learned, and I'll tell you, I'm a better governor in the last 8 years than I would have been 20 years ago.
Was health care on your radar when you came back in and ran for governor the second time?
It was on my radar, but I had no idea, honestly, that I would have the opportunity that the President and Congress presented to me.
Yeah.
And that really is the key to where Kentucky is today from a health standpoint. If the Affordable Care Act hadn't come along, we'd still be chipping away and making very slow progress, and we would still be down at the bottom of the heap in terms of our statistics.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about health, so is it inappropriate for me to ask what your favorite bourbon is, or can you not do that?
I'll tell you my favorite bourbon. Kentucky bourbon.
Kentucky bourbon. Okay.
We have such
That's a
great
pretty safe
brands
answer.
that a Kentucky governor has to like them all, of course.
Yeah,
But they're all great, and what a business! It is going. It is going great guns all over the world. Let me give you a statistic. 95% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky, and that's a fact. The other 5% is counterfeit. So don't fool with it.
Okay, I'll remember that, definitely. Well, Governor, you've been very gracious to give me your time today, and our physical therapists that are meeting in January are going to really get something out of this, and we just want to say a great job in moving the needle forward in healthcare, and appreciate all your efforts. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.